This is Legislatures, the Inside Story. Thank you for listening. I'm the host, Tim Storey, the CEO of the National Conference of State Legislatures. My guest is Reid Wilson, founder and editor of Pluribus News, a 10-month-old news platform that focuses on the states and the policy trends that start in the states. Reid started out his career as an assistant to Chuck Todd on National Journal's Hotline, worked at the Washington Post and The Hill before striking on his own to start this new venture last year. Reid's an experienced and astute observer of state policy and politics, as well as how the media covers the states. We talked about how states are grappling with tough issues like broadband infrastructure, housing, artificial intelligence, and many more. We also talked about the ongoing changes in the media coverage of legislatures. Reid Wilson, what a delight to have you on the show. I mean that very sincerely because you've done some incredible things, not the least of which is striking out and founding Pluribus. Got to take a little bit of courage and really leveraging your experience. So we're going to talk about Pluribus. We're going to talk about your history. But man, thanks for being on the podcast.
You got it. Thanks for having me, Tim. It's great to see you.
We do a little intro so people know just a tiny bit about you, but let's do a little bit deeper dive. How long have you been reporting? How long have you been in the state beat, so to speak?
So I've been a reporter since about 2005, so that's closer to 20 years than I would care to admit. I feel like I was comfortable saying 15 years, but now I got to say closer to 20. So I started out at the Hotline. As if people are familiar with Chuck Todd, I was his assistant my first job out of college. I eventually went on to run the Hotline. Then I went over to the Washington Post, who hired me to run their first blog on state-level politics. And I mean, we all saw a massive hole in the field, and I think that hole persists. So it's been about 12 years now that I've been covering the states, maybe 10 years that I've been covering the states. I absolutely love it. I look at all my friends here in D.C. who are covering Capitol Hill, and they are, 500 people under the Capitol Dome covering one story. And I get to be the one guy covering 500 stories that are happening in the state. There is no shortage of amazing stories to tell, interesting intra-party feuds, the contours of the big issues that dominate American politics, American life. I mean, you think about, Congress doesn't do anything on the big major issues that matter. You and I are both Westerners. I'm a native Westerner. You're, I guess, an adopted Westerner. But when it comes to the Colorado River, it's like the most important story in America today, and probably for the next 50 years. Who's covering it? Who's doing anything about it legislatively? And it's not Congress. It's the states. It's places like Nevada and Colorado and Utah that are dealing with, the shrinking Great Salt Lake. And I don't know, that this one's on my mind right now, so it's a good example. The deluge comes, and so how does California manage their water, which is sort of so critical to not only their growth, but American economic growth? I feel like there's so many seeds that are planted in the states that end up becoming hugely important to the rest of us.
I do want to back up a little bit. Why did you go into journalism, and where you tell everybody where you're from?
Right. So I'm from Seattle. It was a great place to grow up. I actually just got back from there last night. Let me tell you, Seattle in August is a wonderful place. The other 11 months, less so. It's a little rainy up there. So I came out to D.C. To go to George Washington University. I knew that I wanted to do something in politics. And I figured, and my mom was a journalist, and so she sort of taught me how to write. And I just learned that I am much more interested in telling other people's stories than, trying to craft one behind the scenes or something like that. So it just seemed a natural fit. Couldn't have gotten luckier. Couldn't have a better profession.
Well, you're clearly very good at it. And I mean that. I'm not the butter up part of the podcast. This is the legit. You're a good writer, and it's very honest, and you hustle like crazy. Anyways, we'll come back to the my admiration of you. I want to ask about the field of journalism in the states. You probably recall Columbia Journalism Review does this kind of seminal analysis of the decline of state house coverage. And now, in my mind, it was about 5 years ago. It was probably about 20 years ago. Does this ring a bell? And what I'm getting at is, we want this to be about legislatures, right? So this discussion, there was a documented decline in state house coverage. But now there's sort of pluribus models and the others, Axios and Politico and those folks. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of coverage of states, because you probably have seen it, and in a way you're competing with it, or it's probably one of those frenemy things. I'm going to speculate and then pitch it to you, where It's competition at one level, but you need more people writing about it. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, you talk to somebody who's been around state government for a long time, and the guy who leaps out of my head is a guy named Dave Postman, who was the chief of staff to Jay Inslee out in Washington State after he had a long career at the Seattle Times. And Postman will tell you that, when he was covering things, there were 30 reporters in the state capitol and blah, blah, blah. And now there are, 5.5. That's not great for a state the size of Washington State that has Boeing and Weyerhaeuser and all these and Microsoft and all these major corporations, and you need some watchdog keeping an eye on that. And every state has the same story. I'll tell you, when I went to California, when I was at the Washington Post, I went out there to cover one of the really scary budgets where Jerry Brown was showing, a river of red ink. And I walked into the press room with a buddy of mine from the LA Times, and every seat had a little plaque in front of it for whatever outlet that was their reserved seat. And I look around, and I say to my buddy, "Oh God, where am I supposed to sit? There's no Washington Post plaque." And he said, "I'll sit wherever you want. Half of these outlets don't exist, and about another quarter don't send anybody to Sacramento anymore." I thought, woof, that's real tough in a state that's got, what are we up to now, the 5th largest economy in the world. At the same time, it is clear to me that the special interest groups are paying more attention to the states than they are to Congress. If you look state by state at the amount of money that is spent on lobbying state legislators right now, at the federal level, it's about $3.5 billion last year. In the state level, it was about $2.2 billion last year. But that's only in 27 states that actually require the same sort of disclosure that the feds do. So there are 23 other states that we don't know. Do the math on that. And basically, interest groups are spending about as much on the states as they are on the federal government. So somebody's got to be watching this stuff. Not all lobbyists are bad. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of them are fantastic. And everybody deserves an advocate. I mean, the 3 professions that are listed in the Constitution, right, are legislators, lobbyists, and journalists. Those are the only 3. So they have their role, but somebody's got to be watching them. Every one of these legislatures exist in like their own ecosystem, and some are very transparent and open, and others are very much not. The more people we have covering them, the more accountable these legislators are, and probably the better ideas they come up with, and the more things spread between states, and good ideas take off and bad ideas don't.
And it's the old dogs too. It's the sophisticated reporters who actually get on the beat. And I feel like those folks are long gone, who like, I want to have a career being the one dude who knows everything there's to know about state X, right? Or dude Ed. I didn't mean to make that gender specific, but legislators, the relationship with the media is off and on. But I think the really good ones, and especially when you're dealing with those seasoned, smart, who understand the role of the lobby, who understand legislatures. A lot of it's nuance and stuff that, you got to explain to people. My point is that, legislatures, if you say, like, we need more coverage, you're going to say, oh gosh, if all they're doing is looking for the negative story and all that, but I don't think that's the case. I think that the coverage is helpful, and, working with the members. And like you said you're absolutely right. I'm glad you threw that in. The vast majority of lobbyists are, honorable folks who are playing inside the lines and doing everything to advocate for their cause. It's the same with the legislators, right? It's maddening. I can't, a national comedy show did a whole 30-minute segment on legislatures, and it focused on, the, let's say 1% of really bad scandalous cases, and they have to. I'm not criticizing them, but most of them are out there trying to do what's best for their folks and all of that.
So the thing that I love most about my job is, and I do not say this in a pejorative sense whatsoever, there's a level of, maybe naivete isn't the right word, but there's a level of enthusiasm among state legislators that doesn't exist among members of Congress. If I go talk to Congressman X about his or her bill to fix whatever, they will give me their talking points, and they will not stray from them, and they will go over and over and over them again. And then I call State Senator Y about his or her bill to fix whatever, maybe the same thing. And they're so excited, and they want to tell me about it, and they want to tell me where they got their idea and what they think it's going to do. And there are no talking points, because the vast majority of these legislators don't have press people to brief them or anything. It's just this like raw, unfiltered excitement about what they're doing. And at NCSL this year, I know you had a panel on legislative pay, which is not fantastic. These people are not getting rich doing their legislating. but they're all there and they're so excited and they give their time. And I'm sure on an hourly basis, these people are being paid even worse than sub minimum wage, but they're doing it for a reason. And I like that. I mean, that's the eighth grade civics nerd in me. I love that enthusiasm.
You remind me of Alan Rosenthal a little bit. We lost Alan. But not all the people who listen to this know. Alan Rosenthal he was a scholar. He was at Rutgers and just was completely identified with the study of legislatures. But he was not the classic political scientist who based all of his books and writing on what the data told him. And there's a place for that. But he was an observer, right? And I have to tell you, the way you were just laying that out, I'm like, man, you sounded like Alan. Did you cross paths with Alan much?
I think I talked to him a few times early on covering the legislatures.
I'm telling you, there is a need for somebody like Alan in the world right now. You may want to consider that. So let me just wrap this up on the media and legislature media in the states. Is it getting better? Do you see anything changing?
I think it is getting better. And you mentioned the Axioses and the Center Square and States Newsroom and people like that. I would also point to the fact that there's a pretty robust industry of hyper local, hyper specialized news outlets. People it's basically like the Politico of whatever state. So the Arizona Capital Times or the Arizona Mirror down there, or Howie Politics Indiana, Center Maryland, Maryland Forward, and Maryland Matters out in Annapolis. I mean, name a state, and there are at least one or two, if not, in a place like Maryland, 3 or 4. So there is this robust coverage. I wish it existed as much in the Baltimore Sun as it does in Maryland Matters, but we'll take what we can get. So it's improving. The nadir is past, but we wait for the next golden era.
Those are great, and they're must reads. I guarantee you every legislator in those places and all the key staff are tracking those things. So Pluribus, how'd you come up with this? How's it going?
So we've been publishing now for 10 months. Started October 3rd last year. And our whole mission is to, well, actually, it's funny. I was talking to a couple of legislators about this in Indianapolis. We're sort of trying to fill the niche of NCSL when NCSL isn't in session, right? So legislators go to NCSL to get their next big idea. I want a state legislator somewhere to get their next big idea from reading about it through us. Our whole goal is to cover the trends that are happening across state lines because, my line is always what happens in Sacramento or Albany or Austin today is going to happen in 25 states next year and federally the year after that. And just this year, we can look at things like the Kids Design Code legislation that came out of California that then went to Minnesota and New York, and I think Connecticut did one, and Utah and Arkansas did their version, and now they're creating this patchwork that Congress is going to eventually have to deal with. All right, so when somebody is reading, doing the research about how to craft the next big bill, well, we're the place where you can find what people have said in the past, what's different between California and Arkansas and Utah, things like that. So our whole mission is to cover the patchwork, the puzzle, if you will, of a legislative issue as it's coming together across state lines.
Tell folks how they sign up, exactly what they're going to get.
Yep. If you go to pluribusnews.com, you sign up for our free daily newsletter. The really cool thing is legislators and legislative staffers get all of our reporting for free. So they're already, signed up as a member. You can just drop us a line if you're not. info@pluribusnews.com, and we'll take care of you. All legislators get our stuff for free because, frankly, we want to spread good ideas and, frankly, the bad ideas, too. We cover everything. It's been really rewarding. We have more than 1,500 legislators who already get our morning newsletter, and we're hoping that number goes up and up and up.
I know what Pluribus is because I don't know that I'm as geeky as you are, but I'm creeping up there. I'm almost sure you'd beat me in a trivia off, but we'd make a formidable team. Pluribus, tell folks what that's all about.
Yeah, so I've been trying to think of a good name for a state-based publication for about a decade, and finally, I don't remember where the idea came from, but the notion is. You take out a dollar bill in your wallet and it says e pluribus unum, out of many one. So we cover the many, we cover the pluribus. I majored in classics in college, but I took the Greek side instead of the Latin side. So I'm not sure my conjugation is perfect, but hey, if a company like Semaphore can change the spelling of a word, I think we can too.
All right, so you were just at the NCSL 2023 summit, legislative summit in Indianapolis, Indiana, and you did something pretty cool. You, I guess, threw a big old net out there and said, "I'd like to talk to legislators." So, how did that come about? How many folks did you talk to?
So I can't believe I did this, but have you ever used one of those programs like Calendly, where you basically open your calendar and somebody else can reserve a slot? Well, I did that, and I sent a note to all 7,386 state legislators across the country and said, "Hey, sign up for a spot. Let's chat. I want to hear what's on your mind." And lo and behold, people did. And so my days were packed 9 to 5, back to back to back to back interviews. I was smart enough to box out 15 minutes for lunch, but that's all I got. And it was fantastic. We met about 35 or so legislators from every corner of the country. You know, some from my home state of Washington down to Florida, up to Maine. Several people from the Dakotas. There's some really interesting land issues happening in the Dakotas that I need to dig in more on. I heard from them, and basically what I said was, you tell me what's on your mind. What's the next big trend? What are you thinking about when you come to these conferences? And I got a ton of good answers. And I basically filled a notebook with everything that they told me. And so that's going to feed my stories for the next 2 or 3 months. I've got a big Google Doc that all my reporters are going to be able to pull from, and it's going to be great. So we had another reporter there, Sophie Quinton, my colleague, who actually lives near you in Denver. She went to all the panels. So between the two of us, we got to sit down with a ton of legislators and hear what was happening in all the panels. And so I feel like we did a decent job with only two people covering the whole conference. Next year we're going to overwhelm you. We're going to come with our entire team.
Bring it on! What a cool idea, Reid. I mean, I just am constantly impressed by how you're thinking about this and how you're approaching it and how you're innovating and thinking about how you get at this. So I guess my next question is one. You talked about different states, different sizes of states. We had people there from every state except for California, legislators, that is, from every state except for California, because they were in session and we run into this every year and it's a problem. And Democrats and Republicans, I assume. You had a good mix. I mean, we know our numbers are about 50-50. The next obvious question is, what was your big takeaway from these conversations?
Yeah, so the people we sat down with were, I would about equal D's and R's. I think we got more members of minority caucuses than majority caucuses. That's par for the course. It's easier to get the minority on the phone than the majority because, hey, we in the media are one of the few ways that they can get their message out, right? My big takeaway is that in past NCSL conferences that I've been to, I've heard a lot about legislators trying to catch up, doing what others, state X did this, now we need to do that, or whatever. Last year it was all about electric school buses. God, I can't tell you how many people in Denver I had talk to me about electric school buses and catching up with California. And I heard that from West Virginia, from New York, from South Carolina, North Carolina, I can't remember, one of the Carolinas, but everybody was hot on electric buses. This year, it felt to me like people were looking forward more towards things that nobody has tackled yet. And that's, the broadband dollars that they're getting from the feds or the infrastructure projects that need to be tackled, a lot of which is state specific, but they're making they're making changes that other people can learn from. Housing policy, a lot of people talking about zoning rules. And then the big thing are things like the design codes and dealing with technology and social media and dealing with artificial intelligence. So many people are trying to wrap their heads around what AI is, what it does, what it means, and really what's the role of government for interacting with it or regulating it. And everybody's going to have a different answer, but it was pretty clear to me that like the emergence of ChatGPT and those sorts of programs, they started out as a novelty, and there were a couple of legislators, I'm sure you saw this, who introduced legislation that was written by ChatGPT just to get the headline and ha ha ha. But the serious part of this is, oh my God, AI is coming. How do we deal with it? How do we use it, well for governing purposes? How do we regulate it or speed its, the American advantage in economic and technology purposes, but a lot of people are thinking about AI, how it works, and really what their role in regulating it is.
AI is a great example, right? Because it's just so odd. I feel like we could have a session on AI and pet food, and we'd have 400 people show up. Because you can just slap the word AI on anything and you're going to get clicks or whatever. You're going to get attendance at a session. Man, I love the fact that you tapped into that other side of it, which are all these issues none of which dominate the headlines, right? And I mean, I'm thinking about Pluribus and how, you probably had, I don't know if you've done any analysis of your volume of what you pick up, because you're at some level, I assume, beholden to what's getting covered, right? Because you're filtering what you're seeing in papers, right? And they're gonna, if they got one reporter, they're gonna have to cover the hot issue that people are talking about in communities, which often are the really polar, the hyper controversial issues, abortion, I say, which is now in the states, right? It's going to get covered, deserves to be covered. The LGBTQ issues, gun issues. If you had to go back and analyze all those headlines, I think you would find it's disproportionately LGBT. I mean, it's almost like you have a column, you have a chapter every day that's the LGBTQ issues and that. But yet there's all this other stuff, that aren't the headline issues. And I feel like you're trying to get those forward more and out to readers. Is that true?
Absolutely. 98% of the time you hear about a state legislature in a national media outlet, it's because they've done something to make Fox or MSNBC mad. But 98% of the stuff they actually do is stuff that is bipartisan and has a bigger impact on somebody's life, on a vast majority of people's lives, whether it's healthcare or energy policy or workforce development, which is like the underlying issue of every conversation I have. But the fact is, our mission is to elevate things that matter to state legislatures. And that's not always the thing that's in the headline. Yes, we have to cover it when transgender rights issues are up there. We have to cover the abortion fights because they're news in legislatures and because the states are all doing something a little different that they might want to learn from each other on. On the other hand, the bulk of our time is spent reporting on things that matter to people's lives that they're probably not going to read about in the Seattle Times or the Des Moines Register or the New York Times. These changes on the kids' design code, like that's going to have a real impact in the way that kids interact with social media at a time when society is grappling with social media's impact on kids. And so we need to cover that, and we need to be following that, and we need to make that our primary focus. And if you look at our actual stories, the original reporting that we do, I think you'll find that makes up the bulk and the majority of what we do.
Absolutely. And, mental health, Reid, what states are doing on mental health, what states are doing to address teacher shortage, prison guard shortage, and planning for the future of transportation, really out there kinds of stuff. And, I drop this in just about every one of these conversations. We have actually analyzed bill introductions, bill passage rates. Over 85% of all bills are bipartisan. No one knows that. If you poll, do politicians talk to each other? Now, I think the problem is more pronounced of less civility, more partisanship, but it's still, it's not the norm, by far not the norm. All right, let's talk about the legislative sessions that are mostly wrapped up. Most of the budgets now are done, and there's a couple left. Are you at any position now to say what was the 2023? What did the states do in 2023? What's your hot take when you look across the board?
Yeah, if I had to distill it into three main points, states are tackling social media in a more serious way than they ever have before. And that conversation is going to continue into next year. States are dealing with federal money that they have never seen before, especially in broadband, electric vehicle charging, things like that. And then the third issue is that undercurrent that we've talked about, which is workforce. Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, had a great line the other day. She said, the state that has the workers is going to win the economic future. And I can't tell you what a sea change that is from when I started covering these things. I remember sitting down with people like Rick Perry and Bob McDonnell in Texas and Virginia talking about how they were competing for businesses. And now you've got governors and legislators competing for workers. What an incredible change. And I think Noem is exactly correct. The state that is able to attract the workforce, especially in the next 20 years or so, is going to win the economic future.
I'll just make a quick point about the pie chart you just laid out versus the pie chart of the stories that you guys put in Pluribus every day. I mean, I'd like you to do that pie chart of, what were those stories and how much were the social issues and all of that versus what you just talked about. So social media, I just want to just take a little detour on that. What do you think states are doing on social media? Where's that going to go?
I think the low-hanging bipartisan fruit is regulating what the social media companies do in regards to children, how they protect children's privacy. the more contentious thing is going to be the next generation of that old debate over the fairness doctrine on radio. We're gonna see conservative states trying to require all speech to be allowed, or ban the opposite of the prohibitions on certain speech. I think we're going to see liberal states doing something else. I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do. I feel like the internet is the next frontier in that fight over the fairness doctrine.
Montana's law, I mean, it's almost unenforceable. They know that. So I guess a lot of it's going to be on the enforcement element to this whole thing. Like, how do you start to work with that?
Yeah, I mean, attorneys general are suddenly realizing that they really matter.
I love that. Great wrap up. And I'd agree with you. I do feel like, I mean, to be curious, we'll do this whole analysis too, and we'll talk about the big, we usually do it in boxes of 10, what were the 10 big issues? And of course, a lot of it's just the budget. You almost have to just say there's the budget and then really start to talk about the other stuff. But this was a time when states had a lot of money. I think, and I would add to this list, tax cuts. I think it's going to be remarkable how many states in some way, and some of them were symbolic, but there were a lot of tax cuts this year. And I do think the mental health issue really got traction. And then you got the fentanyl crisis, which is, I think, we'll be talking about that next year. Segue, it's August, so I guess we're within shouting distance of the holiday season. I hope. It feels like it's 97 in Denver today. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Are you already thinking about next year's sessions and the role of the election on legislatures?
Oh, definitely. And we know that legislators start planning for next year in these months. I mean, NCSL is the kickoff to next year's legislative sessions. So we're covering that, and we're paying a lot of attention to what folks are talking about next. But don't sleep on those sessions that still haven't gavelled out in places like California, Ohio, all the other year-round states. So,
what about politics? I mean, what's your take on the impact of the presidential non-primary contest? And what are you hearing? I talk to all these folks too. I know you do too. What's your read on it, Reid?
Well, I am looking forward to seeing what happens in Virginia this year. The amount of money that Governor Youngkin is pouring into it is incredible. On the other hand, the abortion question is going to be at the heart of these elections in Virginia, and it'll be fascinating to see whether Republicans have solved their problem on abortion conversations or whether Dems have this cudgel that they're going to take into 2024. I'm watching that very closely, and it's fortuitous that the off-year election happens just across the river where I've got a meeting later this afternoon, so I might just go do some reporting over there.
Yeah, and you're right about the money side of it. I mean, the money we're seeing now, I used to, in some level, bemoan the lack of attention on state elections, but I feel like that has flipped. The national money that's coming into some of these legislative races, and it's far more sophisticated, and how they spend the money is very sophisticated. I mean, a little bit nationalized. So what happens? I mean, is this, if you had to guess right now, who's got the wind at their back in 2024?
Well, despite what happened in 2020, it is incredibly difficult to knock off an incumbent president. It is incredibly difficult for a candidate who has lost the last two popular votes to come back and win one, to say nothing of pending indictments. If I had to bet today, I'd put a finger on the scale for the incumbents. But then again, I think the most interesting races are the battles for House, Senate, governorships, things like that. So, hey, we got an open governorship in Washington State, so watch out there. That's going to be a jungle primary where the top two vote getters, anybody's guess.
All right. Well, we're gonna bring this to a close. I feel like this should be like a regular segment on my podcast because we're in the same stream here, Reid. You and I. Maybe it's a club of two, but I enjoy it. How you feeling? I mean, how you feeling after you've launched Pluribus? I was going to say it was about a year, so 10 months. That was about what I was thinking, and it sure feels like you're getting traction, and you found a niche and a nerve that works.
I think so. I think we're doing okay, and we're getting traction among the legislators, who are the community that we really care about. The lobbyists who need to know what's happening in other states are starting to pay attention to us. Subscriptions are going up. It's slow going. It's hard work. I'm not getting a lot of sleep, but it's rewarding.
We look forward to seeing you. You've been, somebody who has spoken at NCSL events and and we look forward to doing that again soon. And I think we're all, kind of working in the same direction. So I wish you just a ton of success and, genuine gratitude for being on the podcast. Thank you, Reid.
I appreciate it, Tim. Thanks for taking the time.
I've been talking with Reid Wilson, founder and editor of Pluribus News, a 10-month-old news platform focusing on the states. Thank you for joining me and Reid on this episode of Legislatures, The Inside Story, brought to you by the National Conference of State Legislatures.
You can check out all the podcasts from the National Conference of State Legislatures by searching for NCSL Podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Tim Storey, NCSL's CEO, hosts Legislatures, The Inside Story, where he focuses on leadership in legislatures. The Our American States podcast dives into some of the most challenging public policy issues facing legislators. On Across the Aisle, host Kelly Griffin tells stories of bipartisanship. Also, check out our special series, Building Democracy, on the history of legislatures.